You ever seen a ghost? Been abducted? Heard your name whispered from the other room when you're all alone? No, you say? Me either. But if you're like me, you're still fascinated by the paranormal. It seems everyone else has had an experience, and you want to believe it all. So why doesn't it happen to us? What does it all mean? How does it work? Is any of it real? Welcome to Paranorm Girl, a show that will attempt to answer these questions by taking the paranormal completely apart in search of proof. I'm not a blind believer, nor a hardened skeptic. I'm just looking for answers and willing to accept what I find. Welcome back to the Paranorm Girl podcast. I am your host, Kristen. Today's topic is demonic hauntings. Not just your regular ghostly haunt, but that haunt that's a little extra, dangerous and dark. The kind that'll make a family run screaming from their house in the middle of the night. 3 scratches and you're out. As we shall see when we dive into specific cases a little later today, these type hauntings can often include sensory manifestations like being touched, scratched, or hurt. They can often include foul smells, inhuman voices, or screaming, and even terrifying visions. All of this can coincide with a general feeling of uneasiness, heaviness, darkness, and like there's just something off or evil about the location. Not to mention the change that can occur in a person's demeanor or personality. It gets a little wacky on some of these. In just a little bit, we'll be going over some well-known demonic hauntings all across the country and look at the similarities from case to case. Let me shout out real quick to my lovely peeps at my rental company. They are some of the best up there in Pullman, Washington, with helping folks find a high-quality rental property to call theirs. If you're in the area, these guys should be your go-to. Give them a call, 509-338-4653. My rental company, your property is our priority. Thank you for supporting the show, you guys. So, growing up, I lived in two what I would classify as distinctly haunted homes. Maybe I won't go so far as to say that they were haunted, but there was just something different about the energy there, man. Now, being a skeptical believer, such as myself through the years, I've often thought back on these places, going over the reasons that I felt that they might have been haunted or distinctly different. Like what set them apart from all of the rest? Because that certainly is a reality. I can attest to this, and I've spoken to numerous other folks who can attest to this, that living in a haunted home is starkly different than living in a regular home. There are unexplainable things that occur. Your dreams or nightmares go crazy. There's an unmistakable, creepy or restless feeling you can't seem to shake. Issues with electricity, items go missing, on and on and on. But thankfully, neither of my experiences, my homes, went so far as some of these accounts of demonic infestation we're about to talk about. Strange sounds or knocking, horrible odors invading the space, the sensing of evil or terror by the occupants, or objects levitating, falling, or propelling through a room via an unseen force. There have been reports of physical molestation, being rendered paralyzed, the losing of time, spontaneous house fires, and close call accidents. Some of these experiences get serious and can get downright dangerous, which makes sense if we revisit the Warrens' list of the 5 stages of demonic activity, where they list infestation as only the 2nd stage, but it's followed up by oppression, where the energy can begin its journey into a host body by breaking that person at the mind level, making them feel hopeless, fearful, not like themselves, not able to help themselves, priming them for that next stage, which is possession. So demonic hauntings are no joke. I know that, especially in our Western society, it's not enough for the majority of us to just believe in a paranormal or spiritual concept without seeing something to confirm it, right? Even if it's a confirmation bias, we still feel the need for some level of of personal proof. And I think that's a great thing. Not that it does much good in those instances of confirmation bias, but for the rest of us, I think it's good to question whether what you saw was an apparition or a loose eyelash. Are you really feeling fingers on your arms, or did you walk through some cobwebs? It's interesting being a skeptical believer, and over the course of the last 12 months that I've been hosting this show, meeting others just like me, I think for the most part, extraordinary stuff happens to us out of the blue. And our first impulse is going to be, no, it didn't. That wasn't anything. Or because I can't prove it, it didn't happen. Unless we can get a concurrence from a separate person, right? If we get someone else to say that they too also experience what we experience, that does set us up to start looking at it a little differently, doesn't it? And this also just so happens to be another similarity among these demonic haunting cases where the folks involved quite often would not believe that anything was actually going on until someone else confirmed that they had also seen or heard the same exact thing. So enough yammering about it. I'm going to stop talking about it. Let's just get into it. The first case is pretty well known and was actually my inspiration back when I was creating the season in my head for this episode. They produced a documentary on this house in 2018. It is Zak Bagans' Demon House. Quick note, the Unrefined podcast actually just did a really great episode just on this haunting. We are going to be zipping through a handful of these guys, so I will not be spending as much in-depth time as they did. So if this one interests you guys, you want to learn more, go support those guys and catch that episode. So this haunting took place back in 2011. Rosa Campbell, her daughter LaToya Ammons, and LaToya's 3 children move into this house in Gary, Indiana. Within days of moving in, the family claims that black flies swarmed their porch in December, middle of winter, and then just kept returning, even after the family says that, they killed them. Other claims include hearing disembodied footsteps in the basement and the kitchen and basement doors creaking open. Rosa claimed to have seen a shadow figure pacing in the living room. She also claims she was choked by an unseen force at one point. The family says that LaToya's daughter levitated above her bed during a sleepover, and they all had to pray over her until her body set back down. She did not remember this happening. The older boy claims to have been thrown across a room by an unseen force, and the younger son is said to have been under the influence of something at one point, rolling his eyes into the back of his head while growling and threatening the rest of the family. In the year following their move to the house, they had the police called out when their physician noted the children's unusual and what he termed delusional behavior. They were taken to the hospital where the younger boy again acted a little crazy, screaming and thrashing around. DCS would be called. There were sensationalized accounts published at the time and a photo taken at the time claiming to have captured a shadow figure in the window when the Ammons family allegedly wasn't home. And almost mid-year 2012, convinced they were under demonic attack, the family asked for a priest to perform an exorcism. He would interview all of them, and after concluding that they were indeed being tormented, perform 3 separate exorcisms on LaToya. The family would move soon after and have no further incident to this day. Now, there were things that happened when Bagans and his crew went to investigate the house in 2018. If you watched the documentary, of course, you know that. But I really don't want to muddy the waters of the original story, just because I know there seems to be this hardline stance with how people think about Zak and his team and their show. So just taking that original story, let's look at the details of this case and pull out the things that we are going to see over and over again today. The strange sounds, so footsteps and creaking door. Being molested or hurt by an unseen force, so that would be the grandmother being choked, the son being thrown. Seeing the shadow figure in the living room. The younger boy being controlled by something seemingly outside of himself. And actually, the flies. That's another sign of demonic infestation. It's been noted that outdoor animals appearing inside or around nearby can be a sign. And of course, the purported levitation of the girl would be a big one. Okay, next up. This one was supposed to be for a listener request. I might have gotten this wrong. I'm so sorry about that, bud. I think you were hoping for something about Nain Rouge. I'm probably mispronouncing that. That is a big, big legend in the Detroit area of a small, impish, red demon-like creature. However, this other tale fell into my lap. This is the part where I may have misunderstood. So we're going to talk about the other demon of Detroit. So the story goes that as soon as William and Lillian Adams moved into their modest little Detroit, Michigan home, the most sensitive of the family, the children and the family dog, knew something was up. None of them dared go into the very back room of the home. Nothing was obviously wrong with the room. It was tiny, modest, space enough for a bed and a closet. William would decide, because this particular room was set apart from the rest of the house at the end of a long hallway, he would use this as his place of repose after his night shifts at the Cadillac plant, sure that he wouldn't be disturbed while the rest of the family went about their business during the day. Unfortunately, it did not take long before William began having horrible nightmares. Later, he would tell a reporter that they were so horrible that they would leave him limp with fear because they were so real. He would find himself sitting up in bed, screaming his throat raw. One dream, he reports, was when he found himself opening a door inside of the home to watch as a mutilated body fell out. This went on for a little while before he'd had enough. Goes back to sleeping in the same bedroom with his wife. The nightmares stop. On occasion, he would attempt to sleep in the back room, and the nightmares would pick right back up again. About a year after the family moved in, William's mother came for a visit. Either forgetting his terrifying experiences or assuming it was some personal association he alone was having, they put her up in the back bedroom. The next morning, Grams appears for breakfast, pale and shaken, complaining of terrible sounds in the room all night long, and says she thought someone had been trying to break in. Refusing to sleep again in the room and feeling a general uneasiness about the entire house, she would go home early. And at this point, the Adams began to realize that maybe there was something going on with that room, because it would be at this point they would put the pieces together. The dogs and children avoiding it altogether, the nightmares, the sounds that Granny heard. Later that year, an old friend of theirs decided to spend a few days with them. This friend is described as being a practical, matter-of-fact Southerner. So it seems the Adams took this as a personal challenge and the final test on the room when they put their friend up in it, failing to mention everything they'd experienced thus far. So the friend, all of the uneasiness and strangeness unbeknownst to him, goes to lie down his very first night there. And according to him, he wasn't in bed but a few minutes before he felt something turn him over. He had been on his side, facing the wall, and something rolled him over till he was looking directly at the door. Standing in the door was a figure. He says he thought it was Lillian Adams, but then started trembling with fear as he stared. A woman who had her back turned to him and was facing down the length of the hallway, had long, dark hair, and was wearing what he described as a short fur coat and blue dress. That's pretty specific. Feeling intense fear, the friend flung himself out of bed towards the figure, hollering. But just as he approached it, every single light in the house went out. A moment later, the lights would come back on. There was no figure to be seen. He went to the kitchen where he would find Lillian, began to tell her what had just happened when both of them suddenly heard a horrible-sounding, half-human, half-animal wailing coming from that back room. This was followed by an awful, nauseating smell that made both of them feel sick, which also seemed to be coming from the room. And following this, they claim that the trap door in the floor of the utility room leading to a partially dug-out basement below the house raised itself up several inches into the air before slapping back down again. At this point, they called the police. Officers would search the house to find nothing that would give a rational explanation behind the figure in the hallway, the moaning sounds, or the trapdoor moving. The friend and Lillian waited up for Bill to arrive home from his shift. After telling him what happened, he decided that this just could not be happening. He would prove there was nothing to this but overactive imaginations at play here. And if there was a spirit at play, he was going to tell her what was what, damn it. 7:30 rolls around and Bill lays down in the back bedroom. He had been laying in the darkness for a while when he says he heard someone else moving around in the room. He thought it was his wife and whispered out to her, telling her to leave or else they would never see an end to whatever was going on in there. If there was a spirit haunting them, it wouldn't show itself if they were both crammed in there. When he got no response, he turned over to look right into a face mere inches away from his. He said it was the most horrible thing he had ever seen. Its eyes stared past him, and its mouth moved like it was talking, but only emitted a hissing sound. Then the room immediately filled with a terrible stench. Bill ran out of the room, pulling at his own hair and screaming in hysteria. His friend and wife were able to wrestle him to the floor, at that time noticing the same smell as it permeated the entire house. After about an hour of calming him, Bill finally regained himself. He described what he had seen, and that was that. Lillian, Bill, and the friend gathered up the sleeping children and left for good. They would end up finding another place to live without further incident. The only further incident that would take place was when Lillian's brother and sister would visit the home after the Adams had moved out. They went one night out of curiosity to see for themselves if there was anything to the stories they'd heard. The brother apparently went to lay in the back bedroom. He was there for about 10 minutes when the sister says she heard a terrible groaning sound coming from that room and would see her brother rushing out with this horrible look on his face. She asked him what he had seen, but he refused to talk about it, and he would never disclose whatever it was that he had experienced back there. So, in this one, general uneasiness with the kids and dogs avoiding the area. We've got the phantom noises when the grandma was visiting and her general uneasiness with the whole house, the sound that Bill thought was Lillian moving around in the room next to him, and also the instances of groaning or wailing. We've got the nauseating smell on a couple of occasions, the horrific nightmares, the vision of the woman in the hallway, and also that ghastly face hissing and staring when Bill turned over in bed to look. It's a pretty simple story, but this one really kind of freaked me out when I was researching it. Okay, let's move on to this next one. So, a demonic infestation doesn't just take place in people's homes. It apparently can take place in your place of work, your daughter's daycare, an abandoned amusement park, or a busy highway. But I've got a couple prisons here that want to get in on the action. First up, Alcatraz. First of all, it already has the reputation as one of the most haunted places in the world. So, let's just see about that. So the legends go. The Rock was the end of the line for some of America's worst criminals. Though it started as a military prison, it would house some of the country's most notorious offenders for 29 years. Offenders like Al Scarface Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, James Whitey Bulger. I have an ancestor named Vinny the Lips Randazzo. True story. Alcatraz was originally opened in the mid-1800s as a military base that quickly doubled as a military prison, but fell into disuse around the 1920s. About a decade later is when they would reopen it as a full-on, escape-proof federal prison. We won't spend too much time talking about all of the horrific things that happened to the prisoners behind its walls because I do want to get into the actual haunting, but just know that it was a place of brutal punishment, confinement, and its inhabitants had the extreme minimum of privileges. It was understood prisoners were not there to reform, they were there to suffer. One example of the level of brutality and punishment was something called the strip cell. This is probably more commonly known today to us as the hole. Prisoners were completely isolated inside of small, windowless, cold, dark cells and left there for anywhere from a couple of days to a few weeks, only given bread and water for sustenance each day. By the time the men emerged, the effects of enduring this type of physical and psychological torture had taken its toll. prison conditions were so bad, suicide, murder, and insanity actually became a common occurrence amongst the inmates. Ghosts have been widely reported here ever since its closure in 1963, even by the Park Service staff that operate and maintain the property. Along with the sightings, strange sounds, screaming, yelling, crying, and music have also been reported. The most common area people report experiencing activity is Cell Block D. Alcatraz had already had enough nasty history under its belt that by the time it was used as a federal prison, the men already claimed it was haunted. And when prisoners started complaining of encounters with apparitions in Cell Block D, their duress often went ignored by the guards. In the 40s, the guards put an inmate in his cell, D14. Apparently, he immediately started panicking and screaming that a creature with glowing eyes was in the cell with him. He started screaming that it was attacking him. But as you might guess, the guards ignored his cries and went about their business. All night, his cries rang out. No one came to check on him. At some point, he went quiet. The guards would discover him dead in his cell the next morning. Reportedly, when they found the inmate, his face was still twisted up into a terrified expression, and a pair of handprint bruises could be seen around his throat. The autopsy showed death by strangulation, but supposedly it was not self-inflicted. People who have visited the cell since claim to feel a strange coldness while they walk in and around the area, and this particular cell is reportedly a consistent 20 to 30 degrees colder than the other cells in the vicinity, often remaining icy cold even in the height of summer. Visitors have often caught glimpses of this slain spirit. It is believed that this prisoner now roams the prison freely, seeking revenge. But it wasn't just the inmates who had a rough go with the ghostly inhabitants. The guards and staff would often find themselves seeing or hearing things they couldn't quite explain. They have heard a woman sobbing coming from the basement, but have also heard wailing and disembodied moaning throughout the building. They've seen and smelled smoke that seemingly appears suddenly before dissipating suddenly. An apparition wearing a suit, cap, and mutton chops was reportedly seen by staff attending a party being thrown by the warden. The guards claim that as soon as the apparition appeared, the room grew cold and the fire in the stove went out. And since the time it was a running prison, numerous paranormal investigators and tourists have frequented the grounds and claim to experience all sorts of unexplainable phenomena. Disembodied voices, footsteps, cell doors clanging open or shut even when they are known to be locked, whispering and unpleasant smells coming from the cells. Phantom figures have been spotted all over the island, and the sounds of a harmonica and banjo have been experienced as well. There have been countless claims of visitors being touched, but one recent experience with psychic medium Dana Smoller is of a special interest to me, as it appears that, if her experience was valid, she was possessed while inside one of the cells. So she was investigating for a Travel Channel show. She reports feeling the powerful negativity and a male entity presence. She walks with the rest of the crew into the block containing the isolation cells when she says she lost time. She says she came to, crouched down in one of them, rocking back and forth and smiling. She says she felt like she was insane and like she belonged there. At one point during her experience, she threatened the cameraman. But of course, she does not remember doing so. She didn't remember doing any of it. Some really incredible evidence captured came via a photograph taken on a cell phone in 2014. Tourist Sheila Sillery Walsh snapped a shot looking through the window of the visitation area. And when she looked down at the phone, she noticed what appeared to be a shadowy woman inside of the waiting room. When she looked back up at the window, no woman there. Sheila's husband did try to rationalize that it must have been her own reflection as she snapped the photo, but that's a pretty tough explanation to swallow, as the woman's hairstyle and clothing do appear to be of a 30s or 40s style. The Sillery Walshes seem to have come to the same conclusion, and the apparition is now known as the Woman of Alcatraz. That is a really interesting photo. Please check it out below. I will link it. If it is real, it is one of the most convincing forms of evidence of the paranormal I have ever seen. As far as demons go, what are we looking at here? We've got a maybe possession type situation with the psychic medium, some reports of nasty smells coming from the cell blocks. We should, of course, take into consideration the disembodied voices, whispering, footsteps, screaming, crying, all of those sounds, and the negative energy that the psychic felt as she was walking through. That in itself is not terribly surprising, knowing the horrible history this place has. But I don't know. What do you guys think about this one? It certainly has some of the traits of a demonic haunting. It's a bit surprising to me, maybe, that there aren't more. Another prison that comes up on a bunch of demonic activity lists is Eastern State Pen. So there are a few similarities with Alcatraz. The only difference being, this one is way worse. This penitentiary was specifically a placement for isolation of the prisoners. All inmates were confined to windowless rooms. But instead of this lasting only up to a couple of weeks, which, as you recall, had a pretty major impact on the psychology of the Alcatraz prisoners, the isolation cells were the regular cells. Furthermore, no inmate was allowed contact with anyone. Full isolation for the entirety of the sentence in hopes that the prisoners would ponder and pray in isolated silence. Can you imagine? As you might imagine, instead of penitence for a lot of these inmates, they just went crazy instead. At almost 100% solitary confinement, this was a very cruel, very unusual system of punishment. This establishment even housed Al Capone, though only for 8 months, so there's another similarity. Unlike Alcatraz, though, a lot of the eerie events that have taken place inside the walls of this prison have been corroborated amongst the staff, guards, visitors, and inmates alike since the 40s. So much so that numerous areas are well known for the specific occurrences that take place there. Cell Block 12 is known for disembodied voices and cackling. Cell Block 6 is known for its shadow figures that dart around and along the walls. Cell Block 4 is known for ghostly faces. People have also reported seeing a silhouette of a guard in one of the towers, and people report footsteps, wailing, whispering. A maintenance man tells of an experience he had here in the 90s where he had opened up a lock on one of the cell doors when suddenly someone grabbed him so tightly he was not able to move. He said there was a heavy, negative, horrible energy that came out of the cell at him. He says he saw faces and a figure who beckoned to him. Creepy stuff. But over the years, same stuff, same stories, different day, different people. Safe to say this prison is haunted, but demonically so. The corroboration is certainly helpful. Folks seeing, hearing, and feeling the same things over and over, the shadow figures and all other types of figures. While I did not arrive at the conclusion that shadow figures themselves are demonic in nature, there is a connection to be made somewhere in all of this as to why people continuously report seeing them at these heavier, more negative hauntings. Why do they choose to hang around that energy if they aren't demons? Could be an energy thing, a frequency thing. I don't know. The aspect that convinces me most about this location, though, possibly being demonically haunted, is the groundsman who says he was grabbed, held in place, followed up by that horrible energy. The physical manhandling of living humans is just not something that I see reported in regular ghost hauntings. So let's do one more just to drive this whole idea home, and then we're going to wrap it up talking about these regularly reported aspects that seem to take place time and time again in these type hauntings as opposed to other types. The final place I am going to cover is one that I hadn't heard before. I looked through and considered doing the highly debated Amityville haunting, the Perrin family home haunting. It's been done a lot. The Bel Air house in Ohio that is actually a rather interesting one. But Honestly, there is so much activity that takes place there that I have a sneaking suspicion that there's more than just a demonic attachment. I don't want to say what. I don't want to say it's a portal kind of thing, but it feels portalish. No. This final demonic haunting takes place on Long Island. The story goes thus. Jeanette Myron, who was widowed when her firefighter husband was sadly killed while on a job that would come to be known as the Black Sunday Blaze, moved with her 2 daughters to a new home on Long Island in 2006. In order to escape painful memories, in order to escape the media attention. New home, new area, fresh start for all of them. The initial feeling that Jeanette got upon seeing the rundown 2-story home for the first time was creeped out. But she says her husband's firefighter friends offered to fix it up for them. In order to help the mom and young girls feel safe in their new environment and also to deter vandals during the construction, they set up a home security system equipped with cameras. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be long before Jeanette says she was reviewing the footage and spotted what looked like a cloaked, shadowy man in her yard. She described him as transparent and thought it possible she might be seeing things, but then her daughters confirmed that they saw it as well. They also began to hear muffled voices and thumping coming from within their bedroom walls the following year. If that weren't creepy enough, the girls would discover animal bones and some teeth in the nearby woods, while her husband's firefighter friends discovered a couple disturbing items in the basement as they were renovating. A pentagram on the floor and an old diary from 1927. Written by a young girl, it detailed out sexual and physical abuse she was receiving at the hands of her father, who, conveniently enough, also belonged to a cult and performed animal sacrifice. Jeanette claims that one day she came home to find it trashed, with cabinet doors wide open and kitchen items scattered about. According to one source I found, one of the daughters was home at the time and was visibly upset, claiming that everything just flew open instantaneously in the kitchen. The following year, she hired a priest to cleanse the property, but it didn't seem to make a difference. The year after that, one of her daughters was pushed violently from behind off of a swing in the backyard, resulting in a broken ankle. And when that same daughter said she hid beneath her bed, terrified after witnessing an 8-foot-tall figure with horns and a tail step from her bedroom mirror, that was the final straw. Jeanette hired a paranormal investigator and a psychic to come to her house and do something to get rid of whatever this thing was. The investigator thought that it was the renovations that ultimately disturbed and released the demon who hung out in the basement. After doing a cleanse and a blessing, this time with sage and salt, she commanded the spirit to leave. And according to Jeanette, they haven't had any further issues to this day. So, in this one, we have some of the, hopefully by now, telltale signs. Disembodied voices, thumping or strange sounds, that yuck feeling that the mother felt upon moving in, the witnessing of the strange-looking figure in the yard also being corroborated by the daughters. When Jeanette came home to a ransacked place and the upset daughter corroborating that, yes, it did happen. It happened all at once. Doors flung open, pots threw themselves. Of course, the strange, dark magic, whatever it was that was going on down in the basement that the firefighters uncovered, and the daughter physically pushed, resulting in her breaking her ankle. Now, I've sprained my ankle before, and it was not easy for me to achieve, but I did it. And let me tell you, it is not fun. Do you know what level of force and at what angle you would have to be shoved to the ground to break an ankle? Crazy. Let's see. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh, yes. The 8-foot-tall literal demon that stepped from the mirror. Like I said, I hadn't heard this story prior to researching demonic hauntings. In this initial research, I don't know whether this story or parts of this story have already been called into question. This last detail might seem like a dramatic jump from what the family was already reporting, but the entire story does still follow this familiar recipe. It contains a lot of the familiar aspects we might find if we were going to compare this haunting to other types of hauntings. The final part of the show, I'm really excited to share something I found with you guys. I'm going to link it below, of course, because I think it's rather unique and incredibly helpful for someone with my OCD and extremely analytical brain. And you'll see why I say that and completely appreciate this when you go look at the link that I shall provide. What I discovered is a thesis written by a graduate student at Utah State University. The paper is titled In the Presence of Evil, Demonic Perception Narratives. It is copywritten as of 2021, so it's incredibly fresh. The paper itself is only about 30 pages long, so it's a breezy read and important to understand how she came up with her findings at the end and why she did it this way and her own personal beliefs, because, she does have some, and that's okay. It also talks about history and fundamentals, which I appreciate. So all of that stuff. The culmination of the paper is a demonic phenomena classification system. I just think that is such a neat idea for a thesis paper. The information included in this system is all taken primarily from 3 source books, all written by the Warrens, which documents their cases. So those books are In a Dark Place, The Haunted, and Satan's Harvest. The classification system is truly unlike anything I've come across so far. She has taken the liberty of sorting different reported occurrences and experiences during demonic activity and hauntings and put them into 4 different classes: sight and object related phenomena, sounds, smell, and feeling. So let's go through some of these, and you'll start to see why it excited me to find this resource when we have these reported demonic hauntings that we've just talked about that are actually independent of the books that she used. And I hope you can see the importance of that as we go through it. Under the first heading, sight or object-related phenomena. This includes seeing shadow figures, seeing actual apparitions or just full-on whatever figures, objects and people levitating or moving, doors opening, closing, cabinets opening, closing, physical attacks or being knocked down by an unseen force, and the inability to move one's own body. Under the second class, we have whispering, laughter, moaning, inhuman groaning, voices calling their name, footsteps, hissing and knocking, thumping or banging coming from inside of walls. Keep in mind, these are actual reported occurrences from the demonic haunting cases investigated by the Warrens. So are we seeing the similar occurrences to our stories today? The class of smell, third class, people reported rotting or decomposition scents, rotting flesh, and often unspecified or unidentified odd or foul smells. And the final class she lays out is that of feeling. In this one, people are shoved, held down. They feel choked, feeling of hands grabbing arms or being spun around, and temperature fluctuations. This class will also include the feelings we get as emotions or vibes of a place. So the feeling there is something wrong, evil, or dark about a location, and also the feeling of a presence in the room or nearby and of being watched when no one is there. Crazy, right? It's always so interesting to me when I come across a pattern like this. And it's something I had to take into consideration back in season 1 when I was talking about shadow people, and I was just starting out with all of this, but I started to see, those patterns. The question I asked myself was, how can all of these experiences, independent of each other, be following the same recipe? You guys know what I mean? And I think the metaphor I used in the conclusion episode was that of people witnessing a unicorn in the woods. It's one thing if a couple of people say they saw one. Okay. But if thousands of people are telling me they saw this damn unicorn and are able to describe what it looked like, smelled like, felt like, what happened when they saw it, what the unicorn did to them, to their family. And 80% of every person's recounting is the same. You know? I guess that's just something to kind of stick in your back pocket for now. That line of questioning and that perspective. Because at this point, I'm getting convinced so far when I see story after story of the same unexplainable things taking place that something is going on here. Even if I don't know what it is yet, and even if I don't agree with the more common assumption the majority of people have arrived at thanks to religion and modern folklore. So, for now, stay open. Next episode is going to be something really fun to look forward to. I've got some incredible guests lined up for the Conversation series, which is a part of this show I've really been wanting to expand for some time now. I've thoroughly enjoyed doing them in the past, and now is the time to start introducing a few more of those every season. We'll definitely continue on with our season topic episodes, of course. There will be no change to that, but expect some interesting and surprising interviews sprinkled throughout, starting next week with one of the founding members of Lost Souls Paranormal Detectives out of Knoxville, paranormal investigator Jason Fife. So, yes, tune in. Next week, it is going to kick some major booty. For now, follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter, and share this education with someone you want to share it with. You know, look them in the eyeballs, and you say, look, I don't know if I've told you this lately, but you really should be listening to the Paranormal Girl podcast. It says a lot about your character, person I just made up for this outro. That is it for now, you guys. Hope you enjoyed today's subject, because it certainly enjoyed you. Let's cut to your final note. I don't know about you, but this episode, working on it, researching, going through the stories, it kicked it up a notch for me. Truly. I was fine just plodding along, learning, the fundamentals. We're going to be talking about possession, the Christian history of Satan. Then all of a sudden, I sense the reality of it. And I did before. I don't want to make it seem like I totally discounted everything about this phenomenon before this, but there's something that happens internally for me as we go through these subjects when things start clicking into place. Things start making sense before they officially make sense. Possession and demonic activity is a matter of faith. That is the belief held by most, if not all, skeptics of this phenomenon. And I am still looking for instances of a true atheist coming under demonic attack or having their home infested with evil spirits. I'm looking, but I'm not finding anything as of yet. I don't know if these experiences exist, and that raises a lot of questions for me. Anyone listening who wishes to prove me wrong, send me the study, send me the article, because I'm at a place now where I am starting to see the impossibility of these experiences taking place, but that they are still taking place, even if it is only within the confines of some form of religion or belief or culture. Because even that being part of the pattern, I'm seeing in these infestation and haunting cases the pattern of activities over and over and over, independent of each other. And I ask, how? How do they all experience a majority of similar symptoms if nothing is going on here? If it's all in these families' heads, if it's all a religious performance. And I can already tell you prematurely that this may be the case with our exorcism cases as well. My ultimate question now is how, if everyone is just making it all up, are they the same? Is a person's belief strong enough to do this? to manifest this chaos on a level. It can be experienced by multiple people at the same time, or the same symptoms just at different times, seeing the same entities, hearing the same sounds coming from within the same walls, the smells. These are physical occurrences. And this is going to be the dividing line here as we traipse onward toward our conclusion. If you are more skeptical, you are going to say, yes, it's a performance. Yes, they are making it up. These folks' beliefs are so strong that they've basically been brainwashed into believing this to be real. Or maybe they want the attention it might bring them. Or, in some cases, unfortunately, it is an indicator of some physical or mental illness. And if you feel there might be something more here, willing to place your belief in support of something supernatural taking place, you're gonna see the same patterns that I am. The implausibility of something that is still taking place. The actual grief and fear these situations elicit from the victims. You're going to accept that this is not an occurrence that just came out of nowhere. It's been occurring regularly throughout history. You may not believe it's satanically involved. You may not believe it's demons. Hell, you may not believe it's an entity at all. I'm not so sure at this point that I'm going to be able to prove to myself that that is the case. But at the very least, we are holding space in our open minds for something occurring here that is not rational or natural. It's definitely not normal. It is something paranormal. And that will have to be enough until we know more. Stay safe, keep the nightlight on, and sleep with one eye open.